I understand, Syracuse fans, that it's hard to have a lot of optimism in this team right now after what we just witnessed on Saturday against Duke. In case you missed it, ladies and gentlemen, Syracuse lost on Saturday to the Duke Blue Devils at home in front of a sold-out crowd, 38-3. It was an embarrassing performance. I really don't think anyone played well outside the kicker and the punter. I don't care what Pro Football Focus says about Rickie Collins getting an 81 grade. PFF can take their grades, and you know what, you can fill in the blank of what they should do with them. That's neither here nor there. Okay? But what's important at this stage is that Syracuse football can turn the page completely. Fran Brown has coached 18 games for Syracuse football, and he owns a record of 13-5. He has never suffered back-to-back losses since taking over as the Syracuse head coach at the beginning of the 2024 season. And that streak, I'll admit, is in pretty big jeopardy because they're a pretty big underdog against SMU on the road on Saturday. But back to the stat of Syracuse under Fran Brown not suffering back-to-back losses. What it shows you is that Syracuse football with Fran Brown is very capable of bouncing back even from terrible performances, because we're going to go through all the losses in just a moment and how Syracuse was able to rebound following the loss. And it shows you also this, that Syracuse, every game is treated as its own separate game. They really don't let any negative momentum carry over into a following game as far as wins and losses, but it can also work both ways in how they can win a game and look great one week, and then the next week they don't look that great the following week. They can be a little bit inconsistent at times as well. So let's go through now the losses in the Fran Brown era and how Syracuse responded after those losses. So I'm sorry that some of these might be a little bit traumatizing, but just so you know, I am a Syracuse fan. I am a Syracuse alum. So bear with me here too, because we're all in this together as we go through some of these losses in the Fran Brown era. They're not particularly fun, but we got to do it here on Locked On Syracuse. Stanford last year. Brutal heartbreaker. Absolutely brutal. Syracuse was flat in that game from the start. They rallied to take the lead in the fourth quarter, and they just blew it on a 4th and 9 thanks to a terrible play call, rushing 3, dropping 8, and not doubling a guy who's right now playing for the Tennessee Titans in Elagayo manner. Terrible loss. How did Syracuse respond? Well, the Orange won their next 3 games following that loss to move to 5-1 in 2024. That includes a ranked win on the road in overtime against UNLV. That was a thriller. And an ACC win on the road against NC State. But then the Pitt Panthers. And honestly, up until maybe Saturday's game against Duke, this was the worst performance by Fran Brown Syracuse football team. They were pathetic in that Pitt game. They lost 41-13. If you recall, that was the game where Kyle McCord threw 1,000,005 pick sixes, which is a college football record, 1,000,005 pick sixes in one game. I'm surprised it was only 41-13. The math is just not mathing. That's neither here nor there. But anyway, Syracuse responded the following week by coming out flat against Virginia Tech, but rallying in the second half to get a comeback overtime victory. So they responded with a win. Then they have Boston College. Syracuse allowed over 300 rushing yards against Boston College last year, and they lost a close one. I believe it was 37-31. And if they were a little bit better on their run defense, they probably beat Boston College, and who knows what would have happened from there, right? Actually, we do know what happened from then on because we're about to talk about it right now here on Locked On Syracuse. They were not good against the run the following week against Cal, but they did beat Cal, and that was one of their better performances of the season. And then from then on, they did not lose the rest of the way in 2024. They had that thrilling win against Miami. They win the Holiday Bowl against Washington State. And so we essentially forgot about what happened against Boston College. In my opinion, I think that that's the most forgotten loss so far in the Fran Brown era because of what happened after they lost to Boston College. You beat Cal, you beat Miami, who was on the verge of being a playoff team last season. And then you win the Holiday Bowl against Washington State. So they bounced back just fine after losing that game to Boston College. 2025, Syracuse, week 1, they lost against Tennessee. They started out flat in that game. They did not perform in the first quarter, but then they kept it pretty competitive from then on out, but they still lost to Tennessee. How did they respond? Well, they did not come out great against UConn the following week, but they came back. They won that game in overtime. Still a very big victory on Syracuse's schedule. Imagine where they'd be if they did not get that win against UConn. If all else holds true, they're 2-3. And honestly, I don't think they'd be 2-3 right now if they had lost to UConn. They'd probably be 1-4. I don't know if they would have had the confidence to go into Clemson and win in Death Valley had they not staged that comeback against UConn. So it was a big victory for Syracuse football there. And then, of course, Syracuse responded by winning the next 2 games up until this past one against Duke. They dominate Colgate like they're supposed to, and then they go on the road in Death Valley for the first time in program history and walk away with a win. So how are they going to respond this Saturday against SMU? I guess that's the million-dollar question, and feel free to comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you give Syracuse a chance at pulling off this upset? I love your thoughts in the comments section below right now, but history says that Syracuse will actually beat SMU magically. I know that sounds crazy. It sounds nuts. It defies logic because on paper, we'll go through it over the next week here. I don't know if Syracuse really has much of a shot to really upset SMU, especially if they play like they did against Duke. But in the Fran Brown era so far, they're 13-5. And none of those losses have been back-to-back. So Syracuse, they still have a chance to bounce back this Saturday, rebound from the awful loss against the Duke Blue Devils.